When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be going through a list of the Song of Ice and Fire books ranked by your favorite content creators, as I asked 20 different people their lists. Now, we're going to be going through as a consensus. I'm not going to be revealing every single list. I'm more or less going to be assigning point values based upon their list. So your favorite would get a total of 5 points, the max you could get, and your least favorite would get 1 point. And so by the end of it, I tallied up all these different 20 lists, mine including 21 lists, to try and find out the definitive list of the rankings of the 5 main Song of Ice and Fire books. I've done my rankings of the books, I've seen other creators, but for the most part, a lot of creators actually haven't made this known. What are their favorite books? So I was very surprised by the rankings of the books in a lot of ways. I think there was a lot of unique lists that I had never expected to see. I thought this was a great variety. And so let's get into it. Let's not waste a lot of time. I assume this is probably going to be a longer list because I actually do have some analysis as well onto what does the community overall think of the book based on the content creator lists. But I also want to say, let me know what your rankings of the main of 5 Song of Ice and Fire books are, and let's dive in. So at number 5, this one hurt me quite a lot. My favorite book, A Clash of Kings, got rated number 5. It came in with a total point score of 56 points. It was 1 point behind 4th place, but A Clash of Kings, I noticed very early on, was a book that not a lot of people enjoyed. Just going through some of my analysis of the book, out of the 21 lists, A Clash of Kings only got 1st place in 3 lists, mine being one of them. So it was not a book that most people had as their favorite. It was actually the second least voted 1st place, only behind A Game of Thrones, which we'll talk about later on. But A Clash of Kings, 12 out of the 21 lists that were submitted had A Clash of Kings ranked 4th or 5th. For the most part, around 60% of lists had this book in the bottom part of the list. Another 6 out of 21 lists had A Clash of Kings ranked as 1st or 2nd. So there was very little middle ground for A Clash of Kings. Like, there were not a lot of people that were just fine on A Clash of Kings. Either you really liked A Clash of Kings and you had it as your 1st or your 2nd, or more likely you had it as your 4th or 5th book. I saw this throughout most of the list. This was the case. And so A Clash of Kings, to me, is interesting in terms of, we're going to see a lot in the first 3 books. There's a lot of divisiveness in terms of how we rank A Clash of Kings. And I think for the most part, I understand why people rank A Clash of Kings lower. You look at 2 of the main characters, Daenerys and Jon, their storylines are probably at their weakest of the entire series. You have Bran, who also is not the best in this book. And so I really think it comes down to, what do you prefer in the books? Because A Clash of Kings is trying to handle a lot of different things. It's trying to expand the world, trying to dig deeper into our characters while forwarding the plot. Whereas the other books, it felt like all, I think, had one specific thing they were trying to do. Like A Storm of Swords, payoff book, trying to pay off everything the first, 2 books set up. Where you have A Feast for Crows and Dance are more, I think, character and world building focused, so not as much plot focused in my opinion. And then book 1 is the introduction. It is very clear and concise. It's more of a smaller focused story with only a couple POVs and a couple plot lines. It's this mystery of uncovering what happened to Jon Arryn, and it's an overall very different read than the other 4 books. So I think A Clash of Kings, for a lot of people, it doesn't necessarily hit one of those big things that they enjoy with the series more than another book does. So for a lot of reasons, A Clash of Kings just wasn't people's favorites. Now, it is mine, but unfortunately for the consensus, it was dead last, which hurt my soul. And so that moves us into number 4. Number 4 was very interesting because as I started my polling and people that responded back the quickest, A Dance with Dragons was competing for 1st place. As it went on, A Dance with Dragons landed in number 4. I think as more time went on, A Dance with Dragons started to lose a bit of its momentum and it landed down here at 4. And I will say this, number 5 and number 4 are a lot more significantly farther away than number 2 and 3, as there was only separated by 1 point. A Dance with Dragons came in with a point score of 57 points. But what's even more interesting about A Dance with Dragons is, if you want to look at everything I just said for A Clash of Kings, if you even make that even more for Dance with Dragons, A Dance with Dragons came in as the 2nd ranked favorite book. So out of the people voting for 1st place, their favorite book, A Dance with Dragons came in with 5 votes for the favorite book. About 25%, a little bit under 25% of lists had A Dance with Dragons as their favorite book, which was, like I said, second most, only behind another book, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But what's interesting is, even though it was really highly rated as a lot of people's favorite, it was also rated as a 4th or 5th placed book more times than any other book on this list. So A Clash of Kings only had 11 out of 21, and it was ranked last. A Dance with Dragons, 13 out of 21 lists, a definite majority, had A Dance with Dragons as their least favorite or second least favorite book. So people were very split on A Dance with Dragons. I'm one of these people. I'm not a big fan of A Dance with Dragons compared to the rest of the books. I think it's a great book, of course, but to me, it's not as good as the other 4, in my opinion. What was very clear about A Dance with Dragons is, if you love A Dance with Dragons, there's a number of reasons why. Firstly, Dance with Dragons has some of the strongest moments of the entire series. So those moments really stick out for someone if you're a huge fan of this book. There's so much to like in it, in terms of especially the northern plot lines with either Stannis or Jon or Davos or Bran. Those are where this book stands out a ton, and I think a lot of people really liked that aspect of Dance because you really get a lot of character writing. Everything that you get with A Feast for Crows, say, for instance, with like Brienne or Jaime, where you have really deeply focused character exploration. I think A Dance with Dragons does that with certain characters a bit better than A Feast for Crows, just in terms of we're also moving the plot forward. Like Theon, it is a almost completely character-centric plot line, but it also moves the plot really well with the Bolton side of things and the war with Stannis that's to come. So A Dance with Dragons has a lot of highs, and I think that's why a lot of people love this book. I also think the minor plots in this book, the characters that only have a couple chapters, like Jon Connington, like Cersei, like Arya, I think that they're handled really well in this book, and especially those POVs that come from Feast for Crows, I think are actually, for the most part, usually improved in A Dance with Dragons. So for me, I totally get why Dance with Dragons is down here at 4. It was probably the most divisive book of the entire list. It also had, just to throw out there, it had the most 4th place finishes specifically, which is reflected nicely given that it is 4th place. So Dance with Dragons down here at 4, I think makes sense just based upon where people had it. So for 3rd place, it ended up being a tie. And this is hilarious to me because it was pretty distinct. The list was good to go until somebody got their list in right before I was going to record. And so I had to figure out how to do a tiebreaker. So I ended up doing a tiebreaker based upon, okay, let's go to Goodreads. Let's just see whatever book has a higher rating, that'll be who breaks the tiebreaker. I also thought about maybe doing it with first place listings, but I don't know. I kind of was deciding, I think if we're going to do it, let's just do it with a ratings from general audience and maybe critics. So moving into our number 3, and number 3 is A Feast for Crows. Now, A Feast for Crows, I think is better than A Dance with Dragons. I was a bit surprised that it made it to 3rd. Now, I don't know if this is because of, well, content creators. We dive into the books a lot more, and so as you read the books, I've always said A Feast for Crows ages much better. Whereas like A Dance with Dragons, to me, ages worse on rereads. So A Feast for Crows is kind of interesting because it kind of goes into the same area as A Dance with Dragons. There's a decent amount of people that liked A Feast for Crows as their favorite book. It had 4 out of 21 votes, which was 3rd place, only behind Dance with Dragons and then another book we'll talk about. But at the same note, it also had about half of the lists having A Feast for Crows be 4th or 5th. And even going further, 6 out of 21 lists had it ranked last, which was the most of any book on the list. So A Feast for Crows, this one really fell into half of the lists have it either as their favorite or their least favorite, as 4 people thought it was the best, 6 people had it as the worst. So there was a lot of polar opinions on A Feast for Crows once again. Now, it wasn't, I don't think, as distinct as Dance, whereas like Dance, the reason it was 4th place is because so many people had it as their favorite, but then a lot of people had it as 4th place or least place. So A Feast for Crows to me is interesting because I think the reason people really like this book is it really is character-centric. It is character-focused. We get a lot more new characters, and we focus on completely different things than we had in the first 3 books. A Feast for Crows, I think its biggest strength and its biggest weakness lies in its characters. Some people hate that we don't get the big characters. We don't have Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion in this book, but some people like that. We get to see characters like Brienne and some of her great journey, especially once you get into the second half of the book and you start to get into Brienne 5, 6, 7, and 8. She's really good at that part of the book. Jamie is fantastic in this book. Cersei is very entertaining, albeit I'm probably a little lower than I would say most people are on Cersei's POVs in A Feast for Crows. She's fantastic. A lot of the side plots, which again, I really think the side plots throughout both Feast and Dance are usually more interesting for me. Like, I found the Greyjoy, the Martell plot to be some of my favorite stuff in A Feast for Crows. I think a lot of people that rank this book highly, it's because of that aspect of it. I think people that rank this book as their least and their last, it comes down to just, this is not their cup of tea. It doesn't have necessarily what they want from the book, and they prefer other things. And A Feast for Crows also has this issue where it takes the series in a completely different direction. Whereas the first three were very tightly focused books that really balanced the plot, the character progression, world building really well, and told a very complete narrative. Book 4 starts kind of the next phase of A Song of Ice and Fire, where George spends a lot more time on character progression. He spends more time on world building, and the plot at times kind of falls behind because we're expanding the world so much that now we're not as focused as we were, say, in Book 2, Book 3, Book 1. So again, I totally understand why people have A Feast for Crows higher than, say, the other two. Again, I have A Feast for Crows ranked number 4 on my list. I would have A Clash of Kings higher than it, but I totally understand why A Feast for Crows came in at number 3. So moving into number 2, I was pleasantly surprised to say that A Game of Thrones actually got number 2. Very similar to A Dance of Dragons, A Game of Thrones started off in a very different spot. As polling was coming in and people were giving me their answers, A Game of Thrones very much was at the bottom of the list, and just it seems like as time went on, as I got more of a sample size, A Game of Thrones just got higher and higher and higher. And everything I've talked about with A Feast for Crows, Dance, and Clash of Kings is almost the opposite of A Game of Thrones. A Game of Thrones is not a polarizing book at all. Almost everybody in the community had really the exact same thoughts on A Game of Thrones. Now, there are a couple of outliers. Not everybody is the same, of course. Let's just read through these stats real quick, and you'll kind of understand what I mean by it. So, A Game of Thrones had one person, only one person's list had it ranked as number 1. But then, on the flip side of that, only 2 lists had Game of Thrones last. So 18 out of 21 lists had A Game of Thrones somewhere in 2nd to 4th. That to me is the most amount of sense I've seen from this list, just based upon the idea that every time I've ever seen somebody rank the books, A Game of Thrones is always in the middle, because you can't really disrespect it having it last. It is the foundation of the story. It's a great way to kick off everything. But at the same time, I think A Game of Thrones is almost never anyone's favorite, just because it's a book that's introducing the series. It's not really what A Song of Ice and Fire is going to become. A Game of Thrones is the most different book from all of the rest, and that really was reflected in these rankings. And for me personally, I have Game of Thrones at 3rd, and that is really where Game of Thrones was. 7 out of 21 lists had it at 3rd place, which was the most 3rd place votes. 18 out of 21 lists had it ranked between 2 and 4. Again, the consensus for Game of Thrones, and the reason it got to 2nd place was because of its Goodreads rating. It actually beat out A Feast for Crows in terms of critic score, all that kind of stuff. The first 4 were very close, but again, certain people had different preferences. A Game of Thrones just was a middle book for most people. The reason A Game of Thrones is so high is because it never had last place finishes, and, well, it really never actually had first place finishes either, but it was right there in the middle. Most people, they respect Game of Thrones and they move on. So, if you haven't realized by now, number 1 is A Storm of Swords. Now, A Storm of Swords won by a lot. It was not close. So, like I mentioned, A Game of Thrones had a point score of 61. A Storm of Swords had a point score of 79. It was not even close, which is crazy to me because, like I've mentioned, in the early stages of polling, A Storm of Swords was doing fine, like it was around 2nd or 3rd, and then all of a sudden, at a certain point of my polling, A Storm of Swords was top 2 every single list, which makes sense. In my opinion, A Storm of Swords is the best book of the series, albeit it's not my favorite and it's not the one I rank first. But for the most part, there was a pretty big consensus on this. 8 out of 21 lists. So over a third of people had A Storm of Swords as their number 1, their favorite book. This just doesn't surprise me at all. A Storm of Swords is really the book you think of when you think of A Song of Ice and Fire, with all the huge moments, the big moments, all of that kind of stuff. And so let's just go through a couple of statistics as well. 13 out of 21 lists had it ranked top 2, which is crazy. A majority of people had it top 2. Only 3 out of 21 lists had it in 4th or 5th in the list. I'm going to expose you here, Ricky, because you're a wild guy for putting it there. I wasn't going to say anything about anybody's list, but because, I know Ricky personally, I know he can take a joke. Ricky, you're a little wild for that. But yeah. So again, 18 out of 21 lists had it at least at 3rd. That just tells you all you need to know. A Storm of Swords was the consensus best book of the series. It wasn't close. There was no wiggle room. Like with all the other books, separated by only 4 points. It was really, really close. 2 of them were tied. There's arguments you can have. A Storm of Swords, there's no arguments. Content creators believe this is the best book, undoubtedly. So yeah, that is the list. Now, I do want to take some time at the end of the video to do a massive shout out and thank you to everyone that took the time out of their day to make a list, send it to me, and I want to give them all credit in this video, also be in the description. I'll probably also have all these channels up at earlier on in the video. But I want to take a huge shout out to JC the Advocate, Becky Does Blog, Voice of Old Town, The Dragon Demands, Quinn the GM, Fantasy Haven, David Lightbringer, Our Hilts Hurt, A Channel of Ice and Fire, Talking Thrones, Super Gains Bros, the co-host of Bend the Knee, The Civilization X, Ashley of Noth, my goat mod, Ronnie, Septa Shiana's Secrets, Yolk Boy, the co-host of Radio Westeros, Glidus, Bookborn, and Company of the Cat, as well as In Deep Geek. So thank you guys all for participating. I hope you guys all enjoyed. Were you surprised by this ranking? I don't think you'd be surprised by number 1, but maybe where some of the other books were. And I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.